On New Year's Eve, 1972, Roberto Clemente boarded a plane that everyone told him not to board. The plane looked dangerously overloaded. He boarded anyway, because 10,000 people in Nicaragua were dead from an earthquake, and a dictator's soldiers were stealing the food and medicine that Clemente had sent to save them. 3 planes of supplies had already landed in Managua. The soldiers had seized every one. Clemente decided the only way to stop the theft was to go himself. His reputation, that would be enough. The plane was a rusted cargo jet that should never have left the ground. The engine had been damaged in an accident a month earlier and never repaired. It crashed into the Atlantic Ocean less than 3 minutes after takeoff, 1 mile from the coast. Roberto Clemente's body was never found. He was 38 years old. He had exactly 3,000 career hits. He had gotten the 3,000th 3 months earlier in his last at-bat of the regular season. As if he had known, this is the story of the final 48 hours of the greatest ball player Latin America ever produced. A man who spent 18 years fighting for respect in a sport that refused to give it to him. A man who collected 3,000 hits and 12 gold gloves and 2 World Series championships, and then died on a cargo plane trying to feed people he had never met. And the family that waited at the water's edge for a body that never came home. Roberto Enrique Clemente Walker was born on August 18, 1934, in Carolina, Puerto Rico, a small city just east of San Juan. He was the youngest of 7 children. His father, Melchor, worked as a foreman on a sugarcane plantation. His mother, Luisa, took in laundry and ran a small grocery stand. They were poor, not desperate, but poor in the way that most families in rural Puerto Rico were poor in the 1930s. Enough food on the table, a roof that leaked when it rained, and the understanding that nothing would come to you unless you earned it. Roberto fell in love with baseball as a child, hitting bottle caps with a broomstick in the streets of Barrio San Anton, squeezing rubber balls to build the strength in his hands that would eventually produce one of the most powerful throwing arms the sport has ever seen. By the time he was 14, he was playing for a local amateur team called the Celo Rojo Rice. By 17, he was playing for the Santurce Crabbers of the Puerto Rican Professional Baseball League alongside future major leaguers like Willie Mays and Don Zimmer. A Brooklyn Dodgers scout named Al Campanis signed Clemente to a contract worth $10,000 plus a $5,000 bonus. It was a substantial sum for a teenager from a sugarcane family in Carolina. Clemente reported to the Dodgers minor league affiliate in Montreal. The Dodgers made a fatal mistake. They tried to hide Clemente on their minor league roster, benching him on days when rival scouts were in the stands and playing him only when they thought nobody was watching. The strategy failed. The Pittsburgh Pirates, who had the first pick in the Rule 5 draft, selected Clemente in December of 1954. He would spend the rest of his life in a Pirates uniform. He arrived in Pittsburgh in 1955, a 20-year-old who barely spoke English in a city that did not know what to do with him. Pittsburgh in the 1950s was a steel town, blue-collar and overwhelmingly white. The Pirates had not won a pennant in 28 years. The fans who showed up to Forbes Field were not accustomed to watching a dark-skinned Puerto Rican play right field with the intensity of a man trying to prove something to the world. The media called him Bob Clemente, anglicizing his first name without asking permission, stripping away the identity that his parents had given him and replacing it with something more comfortable for American newspapers. Sports writers mocked his accent when he spoke to reporters, rendering his quotes in a broken English dialect that made him sound uneducated. They mocked his injuries when he missed games with back pain, headaches, and a chronic disc problem in his spine, calling him a hypochondriac, implying that he was soft, suggesting that a Latin player did not have the mental or physical toughness to play every day in the major leagues. The racism was not always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, institutional, built into the fabric of the sport. Hotels in southern cities during spring training refused to let him stay with his white teammates. Restaurants turned him away. Taxi drivers refused to pick him up. He was too dark for the white world and too foreign for the black world, caught between two Americas that neither understood him nor wanted to try. Clemente burned with a quiet, relentless fury that powered everything he did on a baseball field. He did not throw punches, he did not scream at reporters. He did not organize protests or give speeches about civil rights. He played with a violence and a beauty that nobody in Pittsburgh had ever seen. He ran the bases like a man who had been told he could not run. He threw from right field with an arm so powerful that base runners stopped trying to take an extra base on him after the first month of his rookie season. He hit line drives to every part of the ballpark with a swing so unorthodox that coaches tried to change it, and Clemente refused to let them. He was not going to let anyone change who he was. Not the coaches, not the media, not the country that treated him as less than. The numbers accumulated slowly, steadily, undeniably. He won his first National League batting title in 1961, hitting .351. He won 3 more in 64, 65, and 67. He won 12 consecutive Gold Glove awards from 1961 through 1972, establishing himself as the greatest defensive right fielder in baseball history. His throwing arm was a weapon that opposing coaches built entire game plans around avoiding. He was named to 15 All-Star teams. He won the National League MVP award in 1966, hitting .317 with 29 home runs and 119 runs batted in. He played in 2 World Series and won both. The 1971 World Series was the moment Roberto Clemente announced himself to America. It was also the moment America was forced to reckon with everything it had ignored about him for 16 years. The Pirates faced the Baltimore Orioles, who had won over 100 games and were heavily favored. The Orioles had won the World Series the previous year and were considered one of the greatest teams of the era. Nobody outside of Pittsburgh gave the Pirates a chance. Clemente hit .414 with 2 home runs, a triple, 2 doubles, and 12 total hits in 7 games. He made defensive plays that defied physics, throwing out runners from the warning track with throws that traveled 300 feet on a line and arrived at the base before the runner's foot touched the bag. He played every game of the series as if his entire career had been building toward this moment. Because it had. The series was broadcast in prime time on national television, giving millions of Americans their first sustained look at Roberto Clemente. For 16 years, he had been Pittsburgh's secret, a superstar playing in a small market that the national media visited only when the Pirates were in the playoffs. Now, with the cameras on him for 7 consecutive nights, the country finally saw what Pittsburgh and Puerto Rico had known since 1955. The Pirates won in 7 games, and Clemente was named World Series Most Valuable Player. In the clubhouse afterward, as champagne sprayed and his teammates celebrated, Clemente found a television camera and addressed his parents in Spanish. He wanted them to hear from him, in their language, before anyone else told them. It was a small act, it was also revolutionary. A Latin American player, on national television, speaking Spanish without apology, without translation, without anyone's permission. For the first time, the entire country understood. Roberto Clemente was not just a great player. He was one of the greatest players in the history of baseball. He had been hiding in plain sight in a small market city, fighting racism and indifference, producing elite numbers year after year, while the national media focused on players in New York and Los Angeles. After the series, Clemente told reporters, "Before, I was a Puerto Rican ball player. Now I am just a ball player." The distinction mattered to him more than any award. On September 30th, 1972, in the final game of the regular season, Roberto Clemente stepped to the plate against John Matlack of the New York Mets at Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh. He was 38 years old, his back ached, his neck was stiff, his body carried the accumulated damage of 18 seasons of playing every game as if his life depended on it. He had 2,999 career hits. The Pirates were already eliminated from playoff contention. The game was meaningless in the standings, but it was not meaningless to Clemente. He needed one more hit to reach 3,000, a milestone that only 10 players in the history of baseball had reached before him. Matlack was a 22-year-old left-hander who would go on to win the National League Rookie of the Year award that season. He was young, talented, and throwing hard. Clemente did not care. He drove a Matlack pitch into the gap in left center field and legged it into second base for a double. It was his 3,000th career hit. He was the 11th player in baseball history to reach the milestone and the first Latin American player to do it. He stood on second base and tipped his helmet to the Pittsburgh crowd, which rose as one and gave him a standing ovation that lasted over a minute. The game was stopped. His teammates came out of the dugout to congratulate him. The Mets infielders shook his hand. For a few minutes, the fact that the Pirates had been eliminated from the playoffs did not matter. What mattered was the number on the scoreboard, 3,000. It was the last regular season at-bat of Roberto Clemente's career. He did not play again during the regular season. He did not know it would be his final hit. Nobody did, but 3,000 was the number. Exactly 3,000. Not 2,999. Not 3,001. 3,000. As if the universe had written the ending before the story was finished. The Pirates were eliminated in the National League Championship Series by the Cincinnati Reds. Clemente went home to Puerto Rico for the off-season, back to the house in Rio Piedras, where he lived with his wife Vera and their 3 sons, Roberto Jr., Luis, and Enrique. He was planning to return for the 1973 season. He had told friends he wanted to reach 3,000 hits and then decide whether to keep playing or retire. The decision was made. Now he had to figure out what came next. What came next was an earthquake. On December 23, 1972, 8 days before the end of the year, a massive earthquake struck Managua, the capital of Nicaragua. The magnitude was 6.2. The destruction was catastrophic. The earthquake hit at 12:29 in the morning, when most of the city was asleep. Buildings pancaked, roads split open, gas lines ruptured, and fires spread across entire neighborhoods. Somewhere between 5,000 and 11,000 people were killed, 20,000 were injured. More than 250,000 were left homeless in a city that had essentially ceased to exist. Nicaragua was already a country in crisis before the earthquake. It was ruled by Anastasio Somoza, a military dictator whose family had controlled the country for decades with the backing of the United States government. Somoza's National Guard functioned as both the military and the police, and their loyalty was to Somoza, not to the Nicaraguan people. When the earthquake struck, President Nixon's first concern was not the loss of life, but the possibility that Nicaragua might go communist in the chaos. Instead of sending aid, he sent paratroopers to help Somoza's National Guard maintain order. Somoza issued shoot-to-kill orders against anyone caught foraging for food. Clemente had a personal connection to Nicaragua that made the earthquake impossible to ignore. He had played winter baseball there with the Puerto Rico Senadores. He had friends in Managua. He had visited schools and orphanages during those trips, sitting with children who idolized him, signing autographs, telling them to work hard and believe in themselves. When the earthquake hit, those children were the first people he thought of. Within 24 hours, Clemente organized the Roberto Clemente Committee for Nicaragua. He went on television in San Juan and begged the people of Puerto Rico to help. He opened his own wallet. He organized collection drives across the island. He gathered food, clothing, medicine, blankets, and X-ray machines. He sent 3 plane loads of supplies and a ship to Managua. Then the reports started coming back. Soldiers from the Nicaraguan National Guard, under the command of dictator Anastasio Somoza, were seizing the aid supplies at the airport. They were confiscating the food. They were stealing the medicine. They were taking the blankets and the clothing and redistributing them to military officers and government officials while the earthquake victims starved in the rubble. A friend who had accompanied one of the supply flights returned to Puerto Rico and told Clemente what he had seen. He said the only way he had stopped the soldiers from taking everything was by telling them that the great Roberto Clemente would hear about it. Clemente heard about it, and he was furious. He decided immediately that he would go to Nicaragua himself. His name, his face, his reputation as the most famous person in the Caribbean would be enough to stop the theft. The soldiers would not dare steal supplies from Roberto Clemente while Roberto Clemente was standing in front of them. He was certain of this. He had spent his entire life believing that the force of his presence could change outcomes, and 38 years of experience had proven him right. The final 48 hours of Roberto Clemente's life began on December 30th, 1972. On that Saturday, Clemente was at the cargo area of San Juan International Airport, personally helping to load relief supplies onto pallets. He worked alongside volunteers, lifting boxes of food and crates of medicine and stacking them on the tarmac. He was not supervising. He was lifting. He was sweating. He was doing the work because that was who he was. During the loading, Clemente discovered that there were far more supplies than could fit on the plane he had originally arranged. A man named Arthur Rivera approached him and offered to fly the remaining supplies to Nicaragua for $4,000. Rivera owned a Douglas DC-7 cargo plane through his company, American Air Express Leasing. He was a small-time cargo operator who had been struggling to keep his business alive as the airline industry shifted from old propeller planes to modern jets. What Rivera did not tell Clemente was a long list of things that should have stopped the flight before it started. The plane was in terrible condition. Rivera had purchased the DC-7 on the cheap and painted the exterior to make it look presentable, but he had not done any significant work on the engines. The aircraft had been involved in a taxiway accident just 29 days earlier, on December 2nd, when Rivera took it out for an engine test, forgot to close the hydraulic pump, and put the plane into a drainage ditch. The accident damaged propeller blades and an engine cooler scoop on the number 2 engine. The damage had never been properly repaired. Rivera had been repeatedly cited for FAA safety violations in previous years. His maintenance records were incomplete. His business was failing, he was cutting corners on everything, and he did not have a qualified crew to fly the aircraft. Clemente agreed to pay the $4,000. Rivera scrambled to find a pilot. He located Jerry Hill, a pilot with over 12,000 flight hours, including 3,000 in the DC-7, but whose record included past incidents. Rivera appointed himself as co-pilot despite having no certification to fly the DC-7. There was no properly qualified flight engineer. The plane legally required a 3-person crew. It had, at best, 1.5. On December 31st, New Year's Eve, volunteers spent most of the afternoon loading the DC-7. By the time they finished, the aircraft was overloaded by approximately 4,193 pounds, nearly 2 full tons over its maximum capacity. The weight was improperly distributed. The plane sat low on the tarmac, its wheels pressing deep into the asphalt. The warnings came from everywhere. Vera Clemente told Roberto she had a terrible feeling. She begged him not to go. His father, Don Melchor, told him not to board the plane. His eldest son, Roberto Jr., told him not to go. Days earlier, Clemente had confided to friends that he had experienced a vivid dream in which he stood overlooking his own funeral. An acquaintance at the airport took one look at the plane and told Clemente it looked dangerously overloaded and that he should not fly on it. Clemente boarded anyway. He boarded because 10,000 people were dead and a dictator's soldiers were stealing food from earthquake victims and nobody else was going to stop them. He boarded because he believed that if you have a chance to help others and fail to do so, you are wasting your time on this earth. He boarded because Roberto Clemente had never backed down from anything in his life. Not from racism, not from injury, not from a sport that tried to erase his identity, and he was not going to back down now. At approximately 9:20 in the evening, on a moonless New Year's Eve night, the DC-7 began its takeoff roll from Isla Verde International Airport. Almost immediately, something was wrong. Witnesses near the runway heard the sounds of engine failure. The number 2 engine, the one that had been damaged in the December 2nd accident and never properly repaired, failed shortly after the plane left the ground. The aircraft reached approximately 200 feet of altitude. With one engine out and nearly 2 tons of excess weight, it could not climb. The pilot, Jerry Hill, attempted to turn back toward the airport. The plane could not maintain altitude in the turn. It descended toward the dark surface of the Atlantic Ocean. Less than 3 minutes after takeoff, the Douglas DC-7 crashed into the water approximately 1 mile off the coast of Isla Verde. The impact was catastrophic. The plane broke apart on contact with the ocean. The fuselage shattered. The cargo of food and medicine and blankets, the supplies that Clemente had spent a week collecting for the people of Nicaragua, scattered across the surface of the dark water and sank. All 5 people on board were killed. Roberto Clemente, Jerry Hill, Arthur Rivera, Francisco Matias, the flight engineer, Angel Lozano, a friend of Clemente's who had volunteered to help distribute the supplies in Managua. 5 men, 5 lives. gone in less time than it takes to play a single inning of baseball. It was 9:23 on December 31st, 1972. Across Puerto Rico, people were preparing to celebrate the new year. Families were cooking, children were setting off firecrackers, champagne was being chilled. In 2 hours and 37 minutes, it would have been 1973. Roberto Clemente would not see it. The news reached Puerto Rico in fragments. Fishermen near the coast reported hearing an explosion and seeing flames on the water. Emergency calls went out. Coast Guard boats launched from San Juan Harbor. Within hours, the worst fears were confirmed. The plane that had taken off from Isla Verde with Roberto Clemente on board had crashed into the Atlantic Ocean. There were no survivors. The news reached the rest of the world on New Year's Day, 1973. The first day of the new year began with the worst news the island of Puerto Rico had ever received. Roberto Clemente, the pride of Carolina, the greatest athlete the island had ever produced, the man who had spent his entire career proving that a Puerto Rican could stand among the greatest players in baseball history, was dead. A massive search operation was launched immediately. The United States Coast Guard deployed cutters and helicopters. The Navy sent divers. Civilian boats from marinas across the San Juan metropolitan area joined the effort. Volunteer divers plunged into the murky water at the crash site, searching for survivors, searching for bodies, searching for anything. They searched for days. They found pieces of the fuselage scattered across the ocean floor. They found the pilot's body, they found fragments of the cargo, waterlogged boxes of food, and ruined medicine bottles. The supplies that Clemente had been trying to deliver to earthquake victims 800 miles away. They did not find Roberto Clemente. His body was never recovered from the Atlantic Ocean. The sea took him and kept him. The greatest player Latin America had ever produced disappeared into the water a mile from the shore of the island where he was born, and the ocean never gave him back. Vera Clemente held vigil at the water's edge for days. She stood on the beach at Pinones, near Isla Verde, staring at the ocean where her husband had disappeared, waiting for the sea to return what it had taken. Divers surfaced with pieces of wreckage. Boats came back with fragments of cargo. None of them brought back Roberto. Their 3 sons stood with her. Roberto Jr. was 7 years old, Luis was 5, Enrique was 3. They were too young to understand what had happened. They knew their father had gone to help people. They knew he had gotten on a plane. They knew the plane had crashed. They did not understand that he was not coming back. They did not understand that the ocean does not return what it takes. Vera would later say that the hardest part was not the death itself. The hardest part was the absence of a body. There was no casket to close. There was no funeral in the traditional sense. There was no grave to visit, no headstone to touch, no physical place where she could go to sit with her husband and talk to him the way widows talk to headstones when nobody else is listening. He was simply gone, dissolved into the Atlantic. The strongest arm in baseball, the body that had played 18 seasons of Major League Baseball without ever once giving less than everything, had vanished as if it had never existed. Puerto Rico went into a mourning so deep and so total that it felt like the entire island had lost a member of its own family. Flags were lowered to half-staff across the Commonwealth, schools closed, businesses shut their doors, churches filled to capacity, and the overflow stood in the streets outside, praying for a man who had been more than a baseball player to them. Roberto Clemente had been proof. Proof that a boy from a sugarcane family in Carolina could become the greatest player in the world. Proof that you did not have to change your name or flatten your accent or abandon your culture to succeed in America. Proof that a dark-skinned Puerto Rican could stand at the plate in a major league stadium and demand respect from a country that did not want to give it. Proof that dignity and excellence could coexist in a world that constantly tried to separate them. Now he was gone, and Puerto Rico mourned him the way a family mourns its patriarch, with grief that had no bottom and love that had no limit. On March 20th, 1973, less than 3 months after the crash, the Baseball Hall of Fame held a special election and waived its standard 5-year waiting period to induct Roberto Clemente immediately. The vote was unanimous. It was only the second time in the history of the institution that the waiting period had been waived. The first was for Lou Gehrig in 1939, another player who had died young and whose character was considered too important to make the world wait 5 years to honor. Clemente became the first Latin American player inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. His plaque in Cooperstown reads in part, "Member of exclusive 3000 hit club." He was a great humanitarian. Those last 5 words mean more than anything else on the plaque. Major League Baseball created the Roberto Clemente Award in his honor, given annually to the player who best represents the game through sportsmanship, community involvement, and contribution to his community. It is considered the most prestigious individual honor in baseball because it recognizes not what a player does between the lines, but who he is beyond them. Every September 15th, during Hispanic Heritage Month, Roberto Clemente Day is celebrated across all 30 Major League ballparks. The Pittsburgh Pirates retired his number 21 permanently. Roberto Clemente played 18 seasons for the Pittsburgh Pirates. He batted .317 with 3,000 hits, 240 home runs, and 1,305 runs batted in. He won 4 batting titles, 12 Gold Gloves, 1 MVP award, and 2 World Series championships, including the 1971 Series MVP when he hit .414 and showed the entire country what Puerto Rico had known for 16 years. He was selected to 15 All-Star teams. He threw out runners from right field with an arm that scouts called the strongest they had ever seen at any position. He played hurt. He played angry. He played through a chronic disc problem in his spine that caused him constant pain. He played with a fury that came from 18 years of being told he was not good enough, not tough enough, not American enough to be considered among the greatest players in the history of the sport. But the statistics do not tell the story of Roberto Clemente. The statistics never told his story. They could not capture the rage in his swing when a sports writer called him Bob. They could not measure the dignity with which he carried himself when a hotel in Florida refused to give him a room. They could not quantify the pride he felt when he addressed his parents in Spanish on national television after winning the World Series, choosing his language over theirs, choosing his identity over their comfort. His story was about fighting for respect in a country that did not want to give it to him, fighting for recognition in a sport that tried to anglicize his name and dismiss his injuries, fighting for the people of Puerto Rico and Nicaragua and every Latin American child who had ever been told that the ceiling was lower for people who looked like them and spoke like them and came from where they came from. He fought with his bat, he fought with his arm, he fought with his presence, and in the end, he fought with a cargo plane full of rice and medicine and blankets, flying through a moonless Caribbean night toward a country full of people who needed someone to care about them. If you have a chance to help others and fail to do so, you are wasting your time on this earth. Roberto Clemente said those words. And then he lived them. He lived them every day of his career, every winter when he returned to Puerto Rico and ran baseball clinics for children who could not afford equipment, every off-season when he visited hospitals and schools and orphanages in Central America and the Caribbean, every time he used his fame not to enrich himself but to lift someone else. Roberto Clemente did not waste his time. He spent every minute of his 38 years on Earth helping someone. He helped his family escape the sugarcane fields of Carolina. He helped the Pittsburgh Pirates win 2 World Series championships. He helped Latin American players see that they belonged in the major leagues, that they did not have to change their names or abandon their heritage to succeed. He helped earthquake victims in Nicaragua when a dictator's army tried to steal the food from their mouths. And on the last night of 1972, on New Year's Eve, while the rest of the world prepared to celebrate, Roberto Clemente gave his life trying to help people he had never met, in a country that was not his own, on a plane that should never have left the ground because he believed that someone had to go and that someone should be him. His body was never found. The ocean took him and it kept him. But what he left behind cannot be taken by the water. The 3,000 hits, the 12 Gold Gloves, the World Series M5P, the award that bears his name, given every year to the player who best embodies what Roberto Clemente stood for: excellence on the field and compassion off of it. The Roberto Clemente Day celebrated every September 15th across all of Major League Baseball. The example he set for every Latino player who came after him, from Fernando Valenzuela to Pedro Martinez to David Ortiz to Albert Pujols, all of them walking through a door that Roberto Clemente kicked open with his cleats and his bat, and his refusal to be less than what he was. 3,000 hits. Exactly 3,000. His last at bat, as if he had known. Roberto Clemente. Number 21. The man who boarded the plane that everyone told him not to board. Because someone had to. Like and subscribe for more baseball documentaries. Until next time.